So, reacting to Sid Warrior today, let's go.
I want you all to do something for me. I want you to look back at your life and try to think about that one moment when you felt like you were at your creative best, when you felt what is known as that spark, when you were able to see the world in a way that you haven't seen before and you have created something that did not exist. What happened at that moment? What happened in your brain that allowed you to do that? To write that poem, to make that song, to sketch that painting?
So, personally, I usually do story writing, that's my creative expression, and painting sometimes. However, people don't find my painting good enough, but I like them. So, the day when even I was impressed by what I wrote as a story, what happened that day was a total withdrawal of attention from all external stimuli. Everything which I was aware of was at intrapsychic level, in the mind, at the level of thoughts. This is what I personally felt. So one can also call it flow state, where all the attention is concentrated at one place, and in case of creative works it is usually your thoughts. Okay, so let's watch further.
I'm Dr. Siddharth Warrior, and today we will be discussing some of the mysteries of the neuroscience of creativity. And the way we will do this is by talking about some of the myths of creativity that we have been led to believe. Myth number one: there is one part of the brain that makes you creative, the so called creative center of the brain. This is false. And in order to understand why this is false, we need to understand how the brain works. We perceive the environment, we perceive the universe through our senses. We see things, hear things, touch things. All of these enter our brain and go to the top of the brain. And when I say top, it is an acronym for temporo-occipito-parietal area. So these are the three lobes of the brain, the three areas of the brain that deal with sensory information. The top of the brain takes all the sensory information, processes them, puts it together, and gives us the sense of reality that we see around us. But it's not enough to just take in information. We also have to do something. We have to interact with the environment. So this top area sends this information to the front of the brain, called as the frontal lobe. And this is where the motor cortex is situated. And from the motor cortex, the nerves come down to your hands, to your legs, to your fingers, and we are able to interact with the environment. We have a motor output. This is the most primitive loop, the loop of input, processing, and output. This is how we move through our environment, and this is the basis of the biological conversation of evolution. As this loop keeps improving, the efficiency of our interaction with the environment keeps increasing. But we are not robots, so the things that we take in also affect us personally. This is where the second loop comes in, the loop at the center of our brain, called as the emotional loop. And this involves a part of the brain called as the limbic system. And this is loop number 2. So there are two loops, one on the outside interacting with the environment and one on the inside dealing with our own emotions. The way these two loops interact decides your thoughts, your behavior, your actions. Now, whether you are making a cup of coffee or whether Leonardo da Vinci is painting the Mona Lisa, it is the same loops of the brain that are interacting, the same neurons that are working. The only difference is how the neurons talk to each other. In what patterns do they connect, do they fire with each other, decides whether you end up with a cup of coffee or you end up with the most famous painting in the world. And that is how myth number 1 is wrong, that there is no one area of the brain.
Input, connecting of neurons, and the output. Now I have a doubt that should we consider that output part or the motor part as something creative? Because that can be easily replicated. Now, according to psychology, creativity cannot exist without some sort of intelligence. And intelligence can also be of many types: artistic, linguistic, kinesthetic. The output part or the motor part has much to do with these intelligence. In which form are you expressing your way of firing of neurons or your way of thinking? If a choreographer or dancer comes with an amazing step, call it moonwalk for example, and suddenly there are many people doing moonwalks on streets by looking at Michael Jackson, trying to copy him. Should they also be considered creative? But the difference is of originality of idea. All the people trying to copy him on streets might be great dancers, so they have good kinesthetical intelligence, not creativity. And this can be applied to any field. Like if we talk about painting, Leonardo da Vinci came up with the idea of drawing a lady named Mona Lisa, and a machine copies it, take a printout of that painting on a page, that too of different size. Machines can replicate almost any sort of motor skill which a man has. Should that be considered creative? So this is something where most of people confuse intelligence as creativity. That's where my doubt related to motor skills being a part of creative process comes in. And I'm not contradicting him when he says that there are many parts of brain required for producing something creative. I have just marked the possibility of differentiating between what is creative and what is intelligent. See, one more thing is that people, while giving advice how to be more creative, often give advice related to the intelligent part of it, as it is more easier to understand, the intelligent part of creative process, the motor part. Like saying one should improve his drawing skills for making innovative painting. Having a good skills at drawing won't help you getting ideas related to drawing as well. That's a different skill in itself. And we know those people who download images from Google and copy it really well. But when asked to draw something on their own, they don't know what to draw. They need something to look at and draw. That's an example of having good fine motor skills, but still not able to produce something creative. This was example of the advice at improving the output skill, how well you express. There is also one advice which is related to input, that you should consume more good content and eventually you will make good content. जब क्रिएटिविटी की बात होती है तो फिर लोग या तो इनपुट के रिलेटेड सलाह देते हैं या फिर आउटपुट के रिलेटेड. जो रियल पार्ट है उसको कोई टारगेट नहीं कर पाया. बेवजह क्रिएटिविटी को अनसॉल्व्ड, लीस्ट अंडरस्टूड वाली कैटेगरी में नहीं डाला गया कि जितने भी आर्टिस्ट से पूछा गया कि आपको आइडियाज कहाँ से आते हैं, वो कहते वी डोंट नो.
This is A.R. Rahman, one of the creative
Amazing.
geniuses of our culture, saying this. I speak to most creative professionals, they always say the same thing, that this script or this idea wasn't mine, came from somewhere.
I don't personally think something being divine in it, but yeah, it's quite unconscious how things mix. Yeah, so if we leave input and output, there is something in between happening at the level of mind which remains untargeted. In one video of Varun, Maya is all what I can remember, where he touched the main epicenter of creativity, where he said that
To be creative, you take those individual pieces and you make a mistake. That's right. You purposefully make a mistake. So that's creativity. You take a set process that you know works, twist, make a slight twist to it, make a slight change to it. And that is how you build new and innovative things.
however, the process of adjusting all other elements included in that creation according to that one intentional mistake is what constitutes most of the part of creative process.
Myth number 2 is one that you would all be familiar with, which is the right side of the brain is more creative. Now, this comes because of so many pop culture references. There have been stories, there have been plays, jokes written on how the right side is creative and the left side is logical. And this comes from this pre-existing notion that the object recognition happens on the left side and pattern recognition happens on the right. Now, there is definitely some specialization, but it is not so clear-cut, and creativity is not either object recognition or pattern recognition. It is actually a dance. It is a dance between the way we see objects and how they interact. And the more our pattern recognition evolves, the more our object recognition evolves. So the same words will look different to us as we start writing poetry. And the last myth is that drugs, alcohol, they tend to make you more creative. And this is the most dangerous myth of all, highlighted by stories of rock stars doing drugs or alcoholic novelists. But the statistics that show that the number of drug addicted artists versus artists who don't abuse alcohol, and the number of people who do drugs and who end up not creating something should be enough proof that drugs and alcohol is not the answer for creativity. But there is a lesson in there though. Where does that come from? One of our earlier speakers, Prakhar Gupta, talked about the importance of courage in creativity. And it is not easy to break the comforting bonds of pre-existing patterns. Any state of altered sensorium, whether it is dreaming or sleepy or daydreaming or drugged or drunk, all of these are altered states of consciousness. and they allow the bonds of discipline to be loosened up. And when the bonds of discipline loosen up, there is chaos in your thoughts. Neurons start connecting to each other in unexpected ways. And in chaos, anything can happen, including art. But you are not in control of that. And this brings me to what I personally believe is the closest definition to creativity. Creativity is controlled chaos. When you have the capacity to allow your neurons to connect to each other in a way that they have not connected before, but all the while you have the ability to step in and shape the outcome as and when you please.
True, very true. Without control, even if your thoughts are connecting in a way, in a really new way, it won't lead to a desired or nice outcome. Like people say that they dreamed of a great idea. I personally feel it is totally a coincidence. While dreaming or in a state of altered consciousness, what if you are getting ideas, it is just a coincidence. Creation occurring in that state where all the thoughts are chaotic and misplaced. It's like making a painting by throwing all the colors on canvas. You might end up making something great, or you might end up making something grotesque, something really hard to look at. Similar is the thing with dreaming. You might end up having a great idea, or maybe just elephants running on giraffe or weird things like that. Yeah, thus the ability to step in and control is very important to shape the outcome. Is correct.
That I feel is creativity, and this does not happen overnight. It is a long process involving practice, courage, curiosity, and the ability to take lots of feedback. But I think it is a journey worthy of our effort. From a personal standpoint, as a doctor who has spent the last 15, 16 years in a medical hospital doing my residency, this idea of art, creativity, poetry has always been as an extracurricular activity, something that you do outside of your normal life. You have to find a little bit of time in a corner of your room to incorporate this. But after reading about neuroscience, I realized that life is a lot like the brain. And just like the myths of neuroscience, the myths of life also has to be debunked. There is no one part of your life for creativity, just like there's no one part of the brain for creativity. Your whole brain comes together to work as a unified structure to help you create. And similarly, your whole life is a platform for your creativity to shine through.
Okay, thank you. At the end, that was just a poetic analogy of life and creativity for giving an optimistic and nice ending. Anyhow, the thing which he said related to courage, Prakhar has said that creativity has a lot to do with courage, which is right as well as wrong. What he said, control chaos, that is also a great definition of creativity. If we see courage, it quite reflects both the characteristics, control as well as chaos. While doing something courageous, you have control, and whatever you are doing is most probably something chaotic. Therefore, you are feeling afraid and need courage for doing that. Courage can be a synonym for openness to experience while explaining this. What actually they mean might be openness to experience, which is one of the most related characteristics while analyzing creative people. They often rank high in openness to experience. Yeah, but to say if you become courageous, you will become creative is not quite accurate. Because what also matters is at what level are you preaching to be courageous. Because it is quite easy at the level of doing things, at the level of output, where somebody comes to you, I have this great idea, I want to execute it, I don't have courage to execute it. They are saying that, oh, you need courage for this. It's true, you do need that. In that example, he already had an idea. While becoming creative, if we are telling how to be creative, courage as an element or openness to experience exists at a very nuanced and unconscious level. Courage exists at the level of how incorrect can you think, how different from the orthodox traditional way of thinking, way of producing something you can think in. Like from so many years, usually the main lead of any movie or any story used to have good intentions. He was good, he was hero. Someone comes with the idea of his hero being a villain and introduce the character named Joker. His courage of thinking of something like this, different from the traditional hero archetype, giving lead to a bad character, requires courage. Now problem solving and real part of creativity comes in adjusting that change you made in the traditional archetype. How will people accept that villain as hero? And that mistake has provided us with required constraints for thinking, as now we have a question to brainstorm upon, which is much easier than trying to think for creating something without any subject in mind at all. thinking of your hero killing his own relatives. Someone thinks of it and what we get is Mahabharata. Arjun killing his family and being motivated by Lord Shri Krishna for doing this. Okay, so if one doesn't have courage at that mental level, he won't be able to think of that idea. That is the level where courage is required. Where controlled chaos is required. The chaos. Okay, so thanks for watching, and I have also created a separate video on how to write good stories. Bye.